I'll give you my entire land. Just make me a mother," whispered the rejected wife to the Lakota. The sun hung low over the dusty plains of New Dakota Colony, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. The wind blew hot and dry, carrying the faint scent of burnt metal and alien grasses. The land was harsh, unforgiving, and alive with subtle dangers. Wicasa, the Lakota chief, stood on a small ridge overlooking his settlement, his eyes scanning the horizon. His people had built a life here, a fragile balance between old traditions and the new technologies that humanity had brought to this semi-terraformed world. From the edge of the settlement, a figure approached. A woman, alone, her long coat flapping in the wind, walked with a mixture of hesitation and determination. Her steps stirred up small clouds of dust, and her shadow stretched across the cracked, dry ground. She was known to some as the rejected wife, the woman whose husband had abandoned her, claiming she could not give him children, and whose family lands were left to crumble in neglect. Wikasa's eyes narrowed. Outsiders rarely came here without reason, and those who did often brought trouble. But something in her walk, in the way she carried herself despite her obvious worry, made him pause. She was not armed, not aggressive, but there was a desperate energy around her, as if the weight of her life rested on the words she would speak. The woman stopped a few meters from where Wicasa stood. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the paper she carried. These were the deeds, the land ownership documents, her only leverage in a life that had turned cold and empty. Wicasa descended the ridge slowly, his boots crunching against the dry soil. The wind tugged at his long hair, whipping it around his face, but he paid it no mind. I have come to ask for your help," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. She glanced at the ridge behind him, at the group of Lakota men watching cautiously from a distance. I cannot give life to my husband, but I can give you my land, all of it. I only ask," her voice faltered. She swallowed, and her eyes met his. "I only ask that you make me a mother." The words hung in the air, strange and bold, against the hum of the wind and the distant mechanical sounds of the settlement. Wicasa stared at her, silent, trying to measure the meaning behind them. The offer was immense. She was offering her entire property, a vast stretch of fertile land, in exchange for something deeply personal. It was not a simple trade of goods or technology. It was a request that touched the heart of life itself. The settlers murmured among themselves. A few of the Lakota elders stepped forward, their faces a mix of curiosity and caution. Such an arrangement was unusual, even risky. The ethics, the morality, the future consequences, all of it weighed heavily in the balance. Yet Wicasa remained still. He had always been a man guided by both reason and respect for tradition, and he knew that the plains offered opportunity to those who dared take it. "Your words, they are bold," Wicasa said at last, his deep voice carrying clearly in the dry air. "And your offer, it is great, but life is not a simple bargain. It is not like trading cattle or land." He stepped closer, eyes fixed on her face. "Tell me, woman, why come to me? Why now?" She hesitated, as if afraid to speak, then took a deep breath. "Because no one else would. My husband left, my family, they cannot help. My lands are empty, wasted, but I do not want my life to be wasted as well. I need a child, to have a life that matters, that continues. You have your people, your strength, your wisdom. If there is anyone who could help me, it is you." Wicasa regarded her silently. There was desperation there, yes, but also courage. Many who came to the plains seeking refuge did so timidly or with fear in their eyes. She came openly, willing to give everything she had. It was not weakness. It was a kind of bravery that demanded respect. The elders murmured among themselves again. "Chief," one of them said, "we cannot ignore this. If she gives us the land, it would help expand the settlement." "But can we accept her request? It is personal." "It is," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Everything here is personal," Wicasa replied, his gaze still fixed on the woman. "To survive, to live, to grow, all of it demands difficult choices. But this is not just a choice. It is life itself. We must consider carefully." The woman lowered her gaze, but her voice was steady. "I have considered. My life, my past, it does not matter to me anymore. But my child could matter. Please, Chief, please help me." A silence fell over the plains. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Wicasa closed his eyes briefly, thinking. The settlers had already been struggling to expand their territory. The land she offered was fertile, rich in minerals, and strategically valuable. Accepting it could strengthen their community, secure their future, and offer opportunities for generations. But this was more than a transaction. It was a covenant, a bond of trust, and a commitment to life. Finally, Wakasa opened his eyes. He stepped forward, close enough that the woman could see the determination in his gaze. If we do this, it is not just for you. It is for all of us. We will act with respect, with care, but know this, the path will not be easy. There will be challenges, dangers, not just from the land, but from others who will not understand. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I understand. I am ready. We will need to prepare. This is not a simple task. It is not only about life. It is about survival, about harmony, about the future of our people and yours. The elders nodded slowly, beginning to discuss logistics, rituals, and the necessary preparations to honor both the Lakota traditions and the new technologies that the colony offered. The woman followed Wakasa back toward the settlement. As they walked, the wind swept across the plains, stirring dust and carrying the faint scent of alien flowers from a distant canyon. She felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Her life had been filled with loss and rejection, but now there was a purpose, a chance to be part of something greater than herself. Wakasa glanced at her. This land, it is vast, and the plains are harsh. You must learn quickly. To survive here, you must understand the land, the sky, the animals, the technology, and the spirits that guide us. I will learn, she said, her voice firm. I will do whatever it takes. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the settlement. Smoke rose from the small chimneys of the settlers' homes, and lights flickered on in distant domes. Life was fragile here, but it was alive. And now, with the promise of a child, with the bond being formed between two worlds, a new chapter was beginning. As night fell over the plains, the rejected wife stood quietly beside Wakasa, looking at the stars that shone bright above New Dakota Colony. She felt small under the vastness of the universe, yet connected to something larger than herself. The journey ahead would be difficult, and the winds of change would not always be kind. But for the first time in many years, she felt hope. And Wakasa, the Lakota chief who had seen many storms, knew that this was more than an offer of land. It was a challenge, a responsibility, and a test of both his people and himself. The plains were silent, but they seemed to whisper that life, no matter how fragile, had a way of persevering. Tomorrow preparations would begin, and the first step toward a future none could fully predict had been taken. The next morning. The plains of New Dakota Colony were alive with movement. Dust rose from the hooves of robotic cattle as they grazed under the twin suns. Wakasa and the rejected wife walked through the settlement, observing the small community he had built. Houses were a mix of simple domes and wooden structures, blending technology and tradition. Every corner of the settlement told a story of struggle, survival, and determination. This land is harsh, Wakasa said, his voice calm but firm. The soil may seem dry, but it can grow life if you know how to work it. The winds can be our friend or our enemy. You must respect them, and you must learn quickly. Life here does not wait for the unprepared. The rejected wife nodded, her hands brushing over the rough walls of the wooden homes. She felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. Everything here was different from her past life. The rigid structures of her old home, the neat streets, the sense of security she had once known. Here, survival was a daily challenge. Here, every choice mattered. I will learn, she said, her voice steady. I want to understand this land, the people, everything. Good. We start with the land. They walked toward the edge of the cultivated fields. Wakasa explained the irrigation systems, a mix of old Lakota methods and new technology brought by settlers. Pipes, pumps, and automated sprinklers ran alongside natural streams, creating a careful balance between nature and human engineering. The woman listened closely, taking notes in her mind, aware that this knowledge was crucial not just for her survival, but for the future she hoped to create. Tomorrow, Wakasa said, we begin planting. You will learn the cycles, the soil, the water. You will see what life asks from you here, and what you can give back. As they worked side by side, a quiet tension grew. The settlers watched with curiosity. Some whispered to each other about the arrangement, unsure what to make of it. Others shook their heads, doubtful that such a plan could succeed. The woman felt their stares, but she did not waver. She focused on learning, on understanding, on preparing herself for the life she hoped to have. Days turned into a week, and each morning brought new challenges. The sun was relentless, beating down on the land and making work difficult. Automated systems sometimes failed, requiring manual repairs. Storms swept across the plains without warning, carrying sand and dust that scratched the skin and made it difficult to breathe. Wakasa taught her how to read the signs, the clouds, the wind, the patterns in the soil, so she could anticipate the storms and protect herself and the settlement. One afternoon, as they repaired a damaged irrigation line, Wakasa paused and looked at her. "You are learning quickly," he said. "But knowledge alone is not enough. You must have patience, and you must understand that life here is not always fair. You will face decisions that test your heart as well as your skill." She nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. "I understand. I am ready for whatever comes." The days were filled with physical work, but also with lessons in culture. Wakasa introduced her to the elders, who shared stories of their ancestors, the spirits that guided them, and the principles that shaped their community. At first she listened quietly, feeling out of place among the people who had lived here all their lives. But over time she began to see connections between their stories and the land she now hoped to cultivate. She began to understand that this was not just about planting crops or repairing systems. It was about building a life that respected both tradition and progress. Despite her growing confidence, fear lingered. Nights were long and dark, and the sounds of the plains, strange howls, shifting sands, distant machinery, reminded her that danger was always present. She worried about the child she hoped to bear, about the future she could not fully control, and about the uncertainty of the bond forming between her and Wakasa. But each morning, the sun rose over the plains, bringing light, hope, and a reminder that survival required courage. Then, one evening, trouble arrived unexpectedly. Scouts reported a small group of raiders approaching from the neighboring colony. They were armed, looking to claim land and resources for themselves. Wakasa called the elders together, explaining the threat and planning a strategy. "We cannot allow them to take what we have built," he said. "We will defend the settlement, but we will do so carefully. We are not reckless, but we are not afraid." She had never been in a situation like this, never faced the possibility of violence so close to home, but she also felt determination. She had come here seeking life, and she would not stand aside while it was threatened. Wakasa assigned positions and roles. Some defenders took traditional weapons, spears and bows modified with energy enhancements. Others operated automated turrets and defensive drones. The woman was given a support role, helping with logistics and tending to supplies, but she was close enough to the action to understand the stakes. When the raiders arrived, the battle began. Dust and sand filled the air, and the sounds of combat echoed across the plains. Wakasa led his people with precision, combining traditional tactics with advanced technology. The raiders were strong, but they underestimated the unity and skill of the settlers and the Lakota. The rejected wife watched as Wakasa moved among his people, calm and decisive, protecting those who were vulnerable and coordinating the defense with a steady hand. She felt admiration, and a strange sense of trust began to grow. This was a man who understood the land, his people, and the responsibilities of leadership. If she hoped to build a life here, she would have to learn from him, follow his guidance, and respect the strength he offered. After hours of tension, the raiders were driven back. The settlement was battered but intact. People tended to the wounded, repaired damaged equipment, and checked the perimeter for signs of further threat. The woman moved among them, helping where she could, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She realized that this life required constant vigilance, courage, and the willingness to face danger for the sake of others. As night fell, Wakasa walked with her to the edge of the plains. The twin moons reflected on the metal of the settlement and the fields they had worked so hard to protect. "Today was difficult," he said quietly, "but it was necessary. You saw how life here is not simple. You saw that survival is not just about knowledge or skill. It is about courage, trust, and commitment." She nodded, looking out at the fields and the settlement. "I understand. I have seen it. And I want to continue. I want to be part of this life, part of this community, part of what we are building together." Wakasa studied her for a long moment. "You are learning more than I thought," he said. "But there will be more challenges. Not all will come from the land or raiders. Some will come from within, from decisions you must make, from trust and relationships. That is the hardest part of life here, the human part. You must be ready for that as well." The woman felt a mixture of anticipation and fear. She had come seeking a child, a future, and a purpose. But she was beginning to understand that the path to these things was not simple. It required patience, endurance, and respect for the people and land she had come to join. As they returned to the settlement, the people were already preparing for the next day. Repairs were underway, crops were tended, and the automated systems were checked and restarted. Life in the plains continued, relentless and demanding, but full of possibility. The rejected wife paused for a moment, looking back at the ridge where Wakasa had first seen her. The journey ahead would be long, and the future uncertain. But she felt a small spark of hope, a quiet determination that she had not felt in years. She had offered her life, her land, and her trust, and in return she had found guidance, protection, and the beginning of a community she could belong to. Under the twin moons, the settlement slept. The wind carried whispers across the plains, soft but persistent, as if speaking of the challenges to come in the life that awaited. Tomorrow, she would continue learning, continue working, continue building, and with each step, she moved closer to the child she hoped to bring into the world and the future she was beginning to shape with Wakasa by her side. The plains of New Dakota Colony were quieter now, but the tension in the settlement remained. Weeks had passed since the raid, and the rejected wife had begun to settle into her new life. Each morning she rose before the suns, helping with the fields, the animals, and the automated systems. She had learned the patterns of the land, the way the wind shifted across the ridges, the signs of water under the soil, the signals that foretold a coming storm. She had begun to understand the rhythm of life here and the role she would play in it. Wakasa watched her closely. He had always been a patient teacher, but he saw in her a determination that went beyond mere curiosity. She wanted not only to survive, but to contribute, to build, to claim a place in the life of the plains. The elders noticed it too, whispering among themselves about how she had changed. What had once been an outsider, a rejected figure, was becoming part of the community. Her presence was no longer questioned. It was becoming accepted. One morning, as the twin suns rose, Wakasa called her to the edge of the settlement. "We will begin a new project today," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It is important. It is not only about survival, but about growth. We must expand the irrigation channels to reach the new fields. This will take skill, patience, and cooperation." She nodded, eager for the challenge. She had learned that life here required effort, that nothing came without work. As they moved toward the new fields, she noticed that Wakasa was unusually serious. There was a weight in his expression, a hint of concern. "The expansion will help feed more people," he said, "but it will also test our unity. We must work together, trust each other, and respect the land. There will be mistakes. There will be frustration, but if we succeed, it will secure the future of the settlement." The work was difficult. Heavy equipment, powered by a combination of energy cores and old engines, needed constant attention. Channels had to be dug and lined, pumps installed, and water flow monitored. The rejected wife worked alongside the settlers, learning quickly but also making mistakes. She fell into the muddy trenches more than once, scraped her hands on metal edges, and cursed softly under her breath when a pump failed. Wakasa stayed near her, offering guidance, encouragement, and occasionally a quiet smile when she persisted despite the challenges. By the end of the day, they had made progress, but exhaustion weighed heavily on everyone. The settlers retreated to their homes, the robotic cattle returned to their pens, and the skies turned a deep shade of violet. The rejected wife sat on a ridge overlooking the work they had completed, her arms wrapped around her knees. She felt tired, sore, and small against the vastness of the plains. Wakasa joined her, settling on the ground beside her. "You have done well," he said. "You have learned quickly. Life here is not measured in days or weeks. It is measured in seasons and cycles, in the patience to endure what is difficult, and the courage to embrace what is unknown." She looked at him, feeling a mix of admiration and quiet fear. "I want to endure. I want to be ready for everything," she said. "But sometimes I feel like I am still an outsider, no matter how hard I work." "You are not an outsider. You are learning, and you are proving yourself. That is all anyone can ask. You are becoming part of this land, part of this community, part of the future we are building together. That is what matters." Days passed, and slowly a change began within her. She felt a subtle shift in her body, a quiet sense of life growing where before there had been only emptiness. At first she doubted it, thinking it was a fleeting feeling brought on by exhaustion or excitement. But the signs became clearer over the weeks. She confided in Wakasa one evening, the sky dark and calm above them. "I think I might be pregnant," she whispered, her voice trembling. I feel it. I cannot explain it, but I know it is true." Wakasa regarded her quietly, reading her face for fear, hope, and understanding. "This is a blessing," he said finally, his voice calm but filled with warmth. It is a sign that life continues, that our efforts are not in vain. But it also carries responsibility. We must prepare, protect, and guide this new life. Her fear eased slightly at his words, replaced by a careful joy. For the first time in years, she felt that her life had purpose beyond survival. She would bring new life into the world, and it would be part of the plains, part of the settlement, part of everything she had begun to understand. But life on the plains was never simple. As the weeks went on, challenges arose that tested her resolve. The robotic cattle, usually calm, grew restless during the sudden heat wave. The irrigation system faltered under the strain of increased use, forcing repairs in sweltering conditions. Storms approached quickly and without warning, flooding fields and damaging equipment. Through it all, Wakasa guided her, showing patience and calm, even when the wind tore at their clothes and sand filled their eyes. One evening, as she tended to a section of the irrigation system, a sudden tremor shook the ground. She stumbled, narrowly avoiding falling into the trench. From the horizon, she saw the flash of lights. Another group of outsiders, raiders this time, larger and more organized than before. Panic rose in her chest, but Wakasa was already moving, signaling the settlers to positions. "Stay close," he said, his voice low but firm. "We will protect this land, and we will protect the life growing inside you. Trust in what you have learned. Trust in your people. Trust in yourself." The raiders approached, but this time the settlers and Lakota were ready. Defensive turrets whirred to life, energy shields glimmered in the fading light, and the people moved as one, coordinated and calm. The rejected wife stayed behind the lines, helping to direct supplies and tend to the wounded. She felt fear, yes, but also determination. She had seen what her life could be if she did nothing, and she would not let that happen. After hours of tension, the raiders were driven off once more. The settlement was battered but intact, and the people celebrated quietly, aware of the lives they had preserved. The rejected wife, exhausted, felt a mix of relief and pride. She had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and survived. She realized that this was the kind of life she had chosen, one of effort, responsibility, and courage. That night, as the twin moons rose high above the plains, Wakasa walked with her to the edge of the settlement. The air was cool, carrying the scent of alien flowers and distant rain. "You have grown," he said, "not just in skill, but in spirit. You are learning the ways of the land, the ways of the people, and the ways of life itself. This is not an easy path, but it is a path worth walking." She looked at him, feeling a quiet warmth. "I understand now," she said. "I am part of this life. I am part of the plains, part of the people, part of what we are building together, and I will protect this life inside me no matter what comes." Wakasa nodded, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "And I will help you. We will guide it together. This child, and all it represents, is a new beginning. For you, for me, and for our people." As they returned to the settlement, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The days of fear and rejection were behind her. Now she had purpose, connection, and hope. The plains were still harsh, still demanding, but she had proven herself capable, resilient, and willing, and for the first time in her life she truly believed that she could shape her destiny, one day, one choice, one act at a time. Under the twin moons, the settlement slept. The wind whispered across the plains, soft and persistent, carrying promises of new life, challenges yet to come, and the enduring strength of those who chose to face the world with courage and trust. The rejected wife stood quietly, feeling the life inside her and the life around her, knowing that this was only the beginning. The suns rose slowly over New Dakota colony, casting a golden light over the settlement. The fields shimmered with dew, the robotic cattle grazed quietly, and the settlers moved about their tasks with calm efficiency. The rejected wife walked among them, feeling a sense of belonging she had never known before. The weeks had passed quickly, and her life had changed in ways she could not have imagined. The child she carried grew stronger each day, a quiet promise of the future resting beneath her heart. Wakasa observed her from the ridge, his eyes reflecting pride and respect. She had endured harsh days, storms, and threats. She had learned the ways of the land, the people, and the delicate balance between technology and tradition. And now the life growing within her represented not only her hope, but the hope of the entire settlement. That morning the council gathered at the central plaza. Elders, settlers, and Lakota warriors stood together, discussing plans for the expansion of the fields and improvements to the settlement. Wakasa spoke with authority, but there was a gentleness in his tone as he included her in the discussions. She realized then how far she had come. from a desperate outsider offering land for a child to an active member shaping the future of the community. "You have learned much," Wakasa said quietly to her later as they walked along a narrow path beside the irrigation channels. "And yet, there is more to come. Life will continue to test you, as it tests all of us. But you are ready. I see it in you." She smiled softly, feeling the weight of his words and the reassurance they brought. "I am ready," she replied, "for whatever comes." Even with peace in the settlement, the plains remained unpredictable. That afternoon, a sudden storm approached, darker and faster than any they had experienced before. The winds whipped through the settlement, tearing at the crops and bending the robotic cattle pens. Rain and dust mixed into a thick haze that reduced visibility to mere meters. The settlers worked quickly, securing equipment, sheltering animals, and reinforcing the temporary domes. The rejected wife helped where she could, her movements precise and careful. She had learned the patterns of storms, the warning signs in the sky, and the necessary actions to protect both life and property. Wakasa moved beside her, his presence calm, steady, and reassuring. "The storm tests us," he said. "It tests our skill, our patience, and our courage, but it also reminds us of the strength of those who endure." Hours passed before the storm subsided. The settlement had suffered minor damage, but no lives were lost. The people emerged, wet and exhausted, yet resilient. They worked together to repair fences, clear debris, and check the fields, and in the midst of the chaos, the rejected wife realized that she was no longer afraid. She had faced storms, threats, and uncertainty, and survived. She had grown stronger, connected, and capable of contributing to the life around her. Days later, as the winds softened and the plains calmed, a celebration took shape. The first harvest from the newly expanded fields had arrived, and the settlers in Lakota came together to share the fruits of their labor. The air was filled with the scent of roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and sweet herbs. Music echoed from the central plaza, a mix of traditional Lakota rhythms and the simple instruments brought by settlers. The rejected wife watched the community she had joined, her hands resting on her growing belly. She saw children running freely, adults laughing and talking, and the elders sharing stories with the younger generation. She realized that this was what she had sought, not just a child, but a life full of purpose, connection, and meaning. Wakasa approached her, offering a quiet smile. "This is your harvest as much as it is ours," he said. "You brought life into the land, into the community, and soon into the world. You have earned your place here." Tears came unbidden to her eyes. For so long she had been rejected, left with nothing but memories of loss and despair. And now she felt the warmth of belonging, the strength of community, and the promise of life that would continue long after her own days had passed. Weeks later, the moment she had long awaited arrived. The settlement gathered quietly as the rejected wife went into labor, supported by the elders and the women who had taken her under their guidance. Wakasa stayed close, his presence steady and reassuring, his hand on her shoulder when she needed strength. The labor was long and difficult, testing both courage and endurance. She remembered the plains, the storms, the threats, and the hard work that had brought her here. She drew on that strength, breathing through the pain, guided by the hands of those who cared for her and the life within her. Finally, the cries of a newborn filled the small room. The rejected wife, exhausted but triumphant, held the child close. It was a boy, strong and healthy, with eyes that seemed to reflect the vastness of the plains and the twin suns above. Wakasa placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his voice soft. "Life continues, and so does hope." The settlement erupted quietly into celebration. The child represented more than a new generation. He symbolized unity, trust, and the resilience of those who dared to face the challenges of the plains. Settlers and Lakota alike gathered, sharing food, stories, and laughter. They welcomed the child into their community, pledging to protect him, guide him, and teach him the lessons of survival, respect, and cooperation. As the sun set over the horizon, the rejected wife sat outside her home, the newborn wrapped in her arms. Wakasa stood nearby, watching the horizon, his thoughts focused on the future. The plains stretched endlessly, harsh and beautiful, demanding yet generous. And now, with life growing both in the fields and in her arms, they had a future worth protecting. The twins' moons rose, casting gentle light over the settlement. Children played in the fields, settlers repaired equipment, and the robotic cattle grazed peacefully. The rejected wife felt a sense of peace she had never known, a quiet joy that came not from wealth, land, or status, but from life itself and the connections she had formed. In the following weeks, the settlement grew stronger. The fields flourished, the irrigation systems functioned smoothly, and the people worked together to maintain the delicate balance between technology and tradition. Wicasa taught the child the first lessons in respect for the land, while the rejected wife shared stories of her past, of courage and determination, so that he would grow to understand both worlds. The plains, which had once seemed harsh and unforgiving, now felt alive with promise. Each sunrise brought the possibility of growth, each sunset a reminder of the beauty of perseverance. The rejected wife looked at her child and then at Wicasa, understanding fully the journey they had undertaken together. It had been filled with fear, struggle, and uncertainty, but also with hope, resilience, and trust. One evening, as the community gathered around the central fire, Wicasa spoke to the settlers and Lakota alike. "We have faced storms, outsiders, and threats," he said, "but we have endured together. Life is not easy here, nor should it be. It demands courage, respect, and patience, but it also offers hope, growth, and the chance to leave a legacy. We are stronger for what we have faced, and we will continue to thrive." The rejected wife sat nearby, holding her child, feeling a deep sense of belonging. She understood now that life was not measured by what was taken from her, but by what she had given, endured, and nurtured. She had faced rejection, uncertainty, and fear, and emerged stronger, part of a community, part of the land, and part of a future full of possibility. As the night deepened and the twin moons cast silver light across the plains, the settlement rested, safe and thriving. The wind carried whispers of life, of hope, and of the enduring strength of those who dared to face challenges together. And in the quiet moments, the rejected wife held her child close, knowing that this was the life she had sought, the purpose she had longed for, and the beginning of a legacy that would endure for generations. The plains were still harsh, the future uncertain and life demanding. But the settlement had grown stronger, the bonds between people deeper, and the promise of tomorrow brighter than ever. And the rejected wife, once desperate and alone, now knew the truth of the plains, that life, when nurtured with courage and trust, could flourish even in the harshest of places.